So I have the honor of moderating again for you all. And again, I'm Keisha Brown with Alliance for Black Lives. And we have Denise Diaz, the Deputy Director of Institutional Advancement. So this is Denise. So, and I guess once you all take a seat, when I call your name, if you could just raise your hand so everyone knows who you are. We have Denise Diaz, Deputy Director of Institutional Advancement, Jobs with Justice. We have Tiffany Williams, Public Policy Director for Southern Center for Human Rights. Is it supposed to be Roberts on there?
Robert.
Okay, I thought so. So Tiffany Williams Roberts, Public Policy Director, Southern Center for Human Rights. And of course, we have Renita Shannon, former Georgia State Representative, House Representative. Okay, so we'll start with you, Renita, because you're closer to me.
All right.
So talk to us about the various ways Black women's choices and bodies specifically are being constantly policed in ways not really pronounced for other groups.
Well, thank you everybody for being here today. We're so excited to talk to you about public policy as it relates to Black women in the South. For this question, I want to make sure that I'm sure these are a bunch of brilliant people and we're all going to talk about, there's a lot of information on this topic. And so I'm going to talk about this from a social perspective for the first question as it relates to Black women being over-policed. There are a lot of behaviors that are not in law as things that are criminal, but we see that Black women are policed and it has impacts. So for example, you probably are familiar now that this starts very young. Black girls are being criminalized in school. They are being disproportionately suspended. They are being giving so many suspensions for things like chewing gum, rolling their eyes, just social things that, a teacher, for example, decides they don't like, a child's attitude, and next thing you know, they're suspended so much they end up getting expelled and kicked out of school. And so these are things where, young Black girls are being hyper-focused on, and folks are just deciding that basically it's over-policing the behaviors of young Black girls. So it's difficult because as you think about how Black women are constantly being policed for their choices and their bodies, it starts very young. You imagine a 5-year-old is just being a 5-year-old, and imagine, a little Black girl being suspended over just her natural personality, because that's really what it boils down to. Statistically, I do have a couple statistics for you that shows you how prevalent this is. Black girls are 6 times more likely to be expelled, and this is in comparison to white girls. They are 3 times more likely to be suspended and 4 times more likely to be arrested than white girls. And this is just talking about in school, K through 12. So that's according to the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. That's a 2018 data. So this is something that has ramped up over time. I know you all are familiar with the stories that we've seen nationally of little Black girls being suspended or asked to leave school because of their hairdo. These are all things that show the over-policing of Black, we will say future Black women, but starting very, very young. And so as adults, law enforcement has admitted as a whole that they have moved forward with policies that are based in racial bias. And so when they're saying that, so for example, stop and frisk policies, that is applying to not only Black men, but that's applying to Black women. And so these are things that, again, are not inherently a crime in the law, but it boils down to if you look suspicious, then the police are, harassing you. And generally, when there is any type of investigation, it's not, because of the way that the laws are written, which we'll talk about a little bit later, it's not hard to find something to criminalize someone with. And so Black women are really, that's really targeting Black women as well. And so, and police have admitted that these types of policies that are based in racial bias really have had a significant amount of trauma impact on Black communities. And, we know today that black women continue to outnumber white women in jail 2-1. So black women are only 13% of the population, but almost 30% of the prison population. And so when you look at things like that, it's pretty clear to see how there is a, I won't say over-policing, because what I am talking about, these actions should not be policed at all. So what I will say is it's clear that there is a policing of the choices that black women make and the social behavior of black women.
First, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here with you all today. As the policy director at the Southern Center for Human Rights, it's my responsibility to help direct the work that we do in hyperlocal, local, and statewide policy spaces. So while our litigators are suing the government or representing people in criminal courts, we try to talk to legislators and other policymakers about ways to avoid sort of like the stick of litigation. When we think about the criminal legal system, one thing that's important for us to remember is it is the net that catches everyone society discards, right? So when all else fails, carceral policy solutions are often the reflex of our lawmakers. And what that means is in every space that we inhabit, whether it be education, the workplace, or just the public spaces, the criminal legal system is disproportionately targeting black people and thereby targeting black women. In addition to some of the statistics that Renita shared, I just want to point out that consistently, even though crime has decreased over the last 40 years, we've seen incarceration rates skyrocket, and that includes incarceration rates for black women. That also means that as criminal legal reform efforts has reduced overall rates of incarceration, it has not eliminated the racial gap in incarceration rates. So for example, in 1980, I wanted to make sure I got this right. In 1980, there are 26,378 black women in prison. In 2016, that number is almost 10 times, 213,722 women, black women. 63% of black people have an immediate family member who has been incarcerated. And we know that black women are pillars of black families, right? Regardless of whether or not society accepts the many different ways that we define family. Even if black men are being incarcerated, who do we see at the courthouses? Who do we see in the visitation booths? Who do we see at the graduation programs, right? It's black women. So incarceration rates aren't the only defining metric, aren't the only metric for how criminal legal systems impact black women, how carceral systems impact black women, because we bear the brunt of restoring communities when different members of our community are taken from those communities. So things like civil asset forfeiture. Right. When I was a public defender, so I've practiced criminal defense since 2008. When I was a public defender, it was not uncommon for a mother, a grandmother, a romantic partner to come to the courthouse to figure out what they can do about the fact that the state has seized their vehicle, the only vehicle that they can use to get to work because someone was pulled over and caught with a small amount of drugs in the car. Despite this being something that extracts wealth from black communities and black women in particular, there have been bipartisan efforts in the state of Georgia to enhance criminal asset forfeiture, which we know is a racial tool, a racist tool that the state uses, right, to do the things that incarceration cannot do. That's in addition to losing your right to vote. There are all of these collateral consequences of incarceration or criminal legal systems or carceral systems that black women face that often are ignored because they aren't necessarily part and parcel of criminal litigation. Does that make sense? And so when we're thinking about the impact of policing, which is the beginning of the spectrum, right? We've got at one end police interaction with communities, and at the other end of the criminal legal spectrum, we have capital punishment. But at every single phase, black women are implicated and often held responsible for the state's failures to adequately resource communities. When we talk about the guaranteed income program in the Old Fourth Ward, right? There are so many people who are critics of that project because we perceive Black women as being less worthy of help. We have, as Black people, internalized the bootstraps philosophy when it comes to Black women and the raising of Black children. And so what Hope has done with that project, the woman who founded the program, her name is Hope, what she's done with that program is demonstrated that anyone given the tools and resources is going to do the right thing to keep their families secure.
I just want to say how they have just, Tiffany, you just tied it all together. And you too, Renita. It is, I'm so happy to be here with y'all. With Jobs with Justice, we're actually a strategy hub for worker rights and expanding bargaining for workers. So I was just so excited to be on this panel because it is something that, for me, it felt like I don't often get to talk about this intersection of white supremacy and gender and patriarchy and how it plays out, in particular for Black women. And so I say that to kind of name what's in the water that is historical and deep around this country's legacy around sexual violence, exploitation of Black women, and I think that has to be named because it speaks to beyond policy what is also there around just, the biases and the perception of the angry Black girl and all these stigma and so forth. So really, how do we have to acknowledge that to be able to really center Black women in policy and really create this culture shift that needs to happen. And so I named that because it also falls into how the bodies of Black women continue to be viewed by many as more accessible than their white counterparts. So we're talking, and what that leads to is Black working women in low status, low pay industries. The majority in hospitality, housekeeping, food service. And these are all sectors that are prone to harassment, vulnerabilities, and likelihood outside of that, the inability to sustain around criminalization, right? So I want to offer the National Employment Law Project, NELP. They teamed up, I saw, with Project Hustle to document the working lives of Black women and femmes in New Orleans, and focusing on criminalization, care work, and occupational segregation. Because it's real. And what they found in this project are stories around how criminalizing, Black women are both criminalized and being pushed into racialized, gendered occupations. So there's an issue around access and barriers, and as Black women do with, their side hustles, and how that is not visibilized, how that is really a form of resistance to not having to go into these very racialized, vulnerable, low-paying jobs. And so I think, at Jobs with Justice, we talk about expanding bargaining and what is a way that we can build agency for Black women in particular, that oftentimes on picket lines, in Florida, I was a labor leader, and just being there, who showed up were the Black women who were organizing their workplaces, right? And so that level of vulnerability, that level of resistance is not the norm. And so how do we help sustain that and really work towards policies that break up those barriers?
Thank you for that. Thank you. Okay, so the second question that we have, we'll move on to the next one. How does public policy directly contribute to the policing of Black women?
So in the first question, I talked about how Black women have been harassed for essentially social behavior that may not end you in jail. It may not land you in jail, but it still has ramifications that do disrupt your life. Now I'm going to talk about basically how the law has actually worked and continues to work to criminalize what is essentially social behavior. So just a little history first. After emancipation of black folks in this country from slavery, a lot of states started, especially in the South, started to come up with things called black codes, which were laws that were written to essentially basically police the freedom of black people as a whole in this country. And so these black codes were basically laws that were prohibiting quality of life and criminalizing basic activities. So for example, black codes look like, you know, making it a misdemeanor if you are loitering, which is basically hanging around on a street corner, which some places actually still have these laws today. Other black codes were things like stealing food. Another, probably the best example of a black code that is clearly just criminalizing social behavior, you know, failing to move over on the sidewalk for a white person. So that means you're walking, they're walking opposite direction. It's a crime for a black person not to get out of the way on the sidewalk for a white person. So these are things that are essentially quality of life behavior things that were written into law as now being criminal, and you absolutely know who it's targeting. So that's the historical sort of criminalizing behavior in law. But we still have that today. Tiffany said it before I could get to it, which is that the way that the law works today is that any behavior that society deems as undesirable, that now is a crime. So the state of Georgia is a leader of mass incarceration, both nationally and internationally. And a lot of that is because any problem, if we're talking about mental health, really any behavior that society does not want to see, well, it's automatically criminalized. So think, for example, sex work. Because people look down on sex workers, that's a crime. And so think, for example, being addicted to street drugs. Okay, instead of getting people resources and getting them the health care and seeing that as a disease that needs to have to be dealt with health care resources, we'll just criminalize it and we put everybody in jail. And we're basically using criminalization as a big hammer and playing whack-a-mole with social problems with that big hammer. And that's why we have our rates. That's why our rates of incarceration are so high. Now, I served 6 years in the Georgia House of Representatives, and you know, I was somebody who read every single bill because I really was looking at all of these bills and hyper-focused on looking for opportunities to make people aware when bills would probably result in the criminalization of black people, because that is so much of what actually does get passed and into law. And there were a lot of times that we would see bills that, you know, were written in a way that the majority of the General Assembly probably was okay with, and sometimes these bills were being advertised to the public as being solutions to problems, but I'm looking at it and I'm saying this is going to get black folks criminalized. And oftentimes when you are pointing out how problematic these bills are, you would hear from colleagues, well, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And I'm looking at it like, well, this bill is neither good or perfect for my community, so it's going to be a no today. So I had a lot of no votes. And the thing that I figured out very quickly was that when it comes to policy and criminalization, which is disproportionately targeting black folks and absolutely not escaping black women, is that policy is being written in a way where the language is extremely loose in the criminalization bills, so that gives an opportunity for prosecutors to be able to bend and twist the law to be able to lock people up. So they specifically don't write the language in a specific way. And all that does is ensnares black people in being targeted for criminalization. And so I'll give you one example and then I'll pass it to Tiffany. I remember this bill was a couple of years ago. There was a bill that basically said they were targeting fraud as it relates to surrogacy. So if you have offered to be a surrogate for a family that cannot carry a pregnancy, they were targeting, saying that there was a problem with surrogates who were having families or couples pay all of their bills while they are pregnant, sometimes give them gifts, and basically ensure that this person had a great pregnancy. And sometimes there would be a financial payment for carrying a pregnancy. But sometimes at the end, you would see a surrogate say after they deliver, okay, actually, I changed my mind. I don't want to give away my baby. And there was a law passed to basically say that would be a crime for the person who changed their mind. This was a bill that I objected to because the language is written so, the way that I'm saying it to you in layman's terms was literally what was in the bill. So a lot of times people think that the bills are, full of legalese, which is, specific language that attorneys would use where every single word matters. But that's not the case when you're looking at bills that deal with criminalization. This bill literally said, if you change your mind after you've received resources for carrying a pregnancy, you now have committed a crime. So when that bill hit the floor, I stood up and I said, this is going to criminalize people who have decided to, there's no way to determine if they actually intentionally from the beginning collected resources and then decided that they basically intentionally knowing that they were not going to follow through on allowing the baby to be adopted. You're just basically criminalizing people for changing their mind. And at the end of the day, who do you think the state is going to believe as it applies to prosecuting somebody for this crime? Are they going to believe Keisha or are they going to believe Kate? I think you know the answer. So I'll pass it to Tiffany.
Can you repeat? I remember the question, but I want to make sure I answer this one and not
How
the
does
next
public policy
one. Okay,
directly contribute to the policing of Black women?
sure. So I mentioned some of it earlier, but one thing that I am seeing increasingly in the policy space locally, so it's city councils and county commissions and at the General Assembly, is there is this impulse by many lawmakers to avoid your very best advocates because they transparently advocate in the best interest of Black people or Black women. Many of the leading policy experts in this state are, in fact, Black women who carry with us the experiences of being part of Black communities impacted by the weight of mass incarceration, the war on drugs. And what we started to see in 2020, as the crime rate, the violent crime rate increased, and public health experts were saying this is happening right now, but as the pandemic subsides, you're going to see violent crime decrease, right? And we saw that. And we started to see an increase in things like street racing. And some places around the country were saying, here are the ways places like California, Arizona have dealt with it. Provide a place for these kids to do this, have some civil regulation, but do not default to enhanced criminal penalties because the fascination with this will be short-lived. So you will enact a policy that will endure for centuries potentially for a problem that is going to be just a moment in time. Right, and you're not creating a long-term solution. The other thing experts said on that specific thing was, and this will not cause street racing to decrease, right? Come 2023, here are all the journals, all of the experts. Oh, alarmingly, crime rate has decreased since 2020, right? Exactly what community organizers said because we read. We talked to researchers. We weren't being led by emotion. What do public officials do? They get on TV and they say, the mayor, the governor, everybody, they get on TV, they say, I would like to pat myself on the back because I have caused crime rates to plummet. Right. Violent crime has plummeted, right? And that is not a good faith position to take, but it is a political position to take that then insulates policymakers who are also making the same argument, right? And what it does is it enables them to increase harm. So now where we are on a public policy level in the state of Georgia is so many of our supposed allies at the General Assembly, at the Board of Commissioners, and at our city councils have been dormant or actually harmful since 2020 in ways that have enabled far-right factions to enact very dangerous legislation that is targeting dissent, political dissent. And we know that Black women are at the helm of social movements. We are the fundraisers, we are the leaders, we are the people who are in front of the microphone. We aren't the people who get the credit. Right? But there is a piece of legislation right now that is being considered that defines material support for terrorism. How many people know that last year in January, the first ever environmental defender to be killed on American soil was killed in the name of building Cop City? That is a metric that international bodies use. So international bodies like the United Nations and other deliberative bodies looking at treaties, they look at whether environmental defenders are killed as a factor that precipitates the fall of a government, the fall of democracy. After that killing took place, we started to see all of these different initiatives, not only aimed at drug use, which disproportionately impacts Black women, not only looking at sex work, which disproportionately impacts Black women, right? But looking at material support for terrorism that can be something as simple as training canvassers. It is not just the people we like to vilify who are responsible for this proposal even being seriously considered. It is being seriously considered because everyone has tilled the soil to make lawmakers and others afraid of Black people again, right? It's not as though people have loved us for centuries. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is it was at some point not politically correct to be so transparent about the disdain for Black people and Black life, right? There was a period of time where being called an N-word lover was no longer a public insult. But where we are on policy right now is even the hint of being, of liking people like me, right? People who have been educated and trained their entire careers to advocate for Black people. That is something that could be construed as material support for terrorism that is even broader than the federal definition, and it's what Renita talked about. What this law says was so loose that it could even criminalize what Southern Center does, which is fine lawyers for protesters who have been arrested. And we said, hey, this is a little, if people find lawyers, can they be prosecuted? And legislators were willing to include language that pulled out legal support from that bill. But there's still really dangerous components of that bill and others. And so public policy is not just the laws that are enacted, right? It is the way that we ignore the dangerousness of rhetoric, tactics, right? Vilification, because we can't get to a point where we can't stay at this place where Black people are afraid to be seen with Black advocates because they are afraid of what the people who already want to dismantle our society think of them. And unfortunately, I think that that's where we are right now in the state of Georgia. That is where we are at City Hall, and that is where we are at the Board of Commissioners.
I mean, just adding to what came up for me around this, as it relates to work, I think the policy that, first dismantling policy that criminalizes the informal economies, as I spoke to earlier around side hustles, but, yeah, in whether it be street vendor, sex work, whether it be, folks that are, making meals out of their home, like there is a level that these informal economies aren't even visibilized, and it's work. And never mind all the reproductive labor that is done and is not visibilized. And, for Black women who dedicate years doing reproductive labor, how are they getting access to the safety net, their retirement, and so forth? Like I think about a friend of mine, all her life a hairdresser, and she doesn't have retirement. She doesn't have, so there's this level of, and also thinking about all the Black women that are taking, as you mentioned, Tiffany, like the financial burden of criminalization of their family members. And so I'm a big proponent of the guaranteed income programs because it also challenges this notion of, just having money to have this just income at a base level for Black folks and Black women in particular really is going against the dominant narrative, you know? So I'll just say that, and just like improving laws around, decriminalizing of some survivors of domestic violence, but also improving laws around harassment and protections for harassment and violence in the workplace.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So the next question, give us a recent if you all could quickly, give us a recent example, real life example of Black women's body or action being policed in a way that would never happen to any other population. Quick example, please.
Yes,
Thank you.
quick. So this is a recent example, happened within the last 5 years. Marsha Jones, I think she was in Tennessee. She was pregnant and she got into a verbal altercation with another woman. That woman pulled out a gun and shot her in the belly, and as a result, Marsha had a miscarriage. The police did not arrest the woman who shot Marsha. They arrested Marsha, saying that, you know, carrying a pregnancy, she should not have been in any sort of fight that would lead to that type of violence. So basically, she was carrying her pregnancy wrong, and they charged her with manslaughter. The charges were dropped, but she did get arrested, and she had to go through the process of basically, you know, it's a process. That takes a while for charges to get dropped. Second quick example, I'm not sure, I don't remember where this happened. It may have happened in Georgia, but there was a Black woman who was charged with child abuse because she did not have child care, and she was a single mother with 2 kids. She had a shift to work to basically provide the basics for her children, had to keep her job. And so she had her children sit in the parking lot in her car of her employer while she worked her shift. Somebody saw it, called the police. She got charged with child abuse.
I'll share the story of Jazima Goldring, who in 2015, Jazima was a trans Black woman, or is a trans Black woman, was in Midtown near Ponce City Market, had left the shelter because, you can't stay in the shelter all day, had a stress ball in her hand, a homemade stress ball that they made in the shelter. So she gets pulled over, she's walking with her partner, and they suspect her of sex work. The police suspect her of sex work. They they frisk her, they find the stress ball. They say, "What is this?" She says, "A stress ball." They say, "Do you mind if I cut it open?" She says, "Sure, no problem." They cut this stress ball open and field test it for narcotics and say that it tested positive for, I believe, heroin, okay? And you know how big a stress ball is, so that's like a felony. I mean, all drugs in Georgia are felony, but it's not a small drug charge, right? So it's charged, it's held at the Fulton County Jail for months, is sexually assaulted or is assaulted in the Fulton County Jail. Somewhere down the line, they do an actual lab test of the stress ball, and lo and behold, it was not cocaine or heroin. It was like sand or something. And so when a Trump-appointed federal judge heard Jazima's federal case, her civil case, the judge said that Atlanta Police Department's quota system has to be one of the driving factors for Jazima's arrest, because Atlanta has a policing point system that gives police points for every arrest they make. They're supposed to get 8 points a day, and you get more arrests for a felony than you do for a misdemeanor, than you do for a traffic ticket, and so on. If Jazima was not a trans Black woman walking with a partner in Midtown, she would not have been pulled over. She would not have been frisked. My friend Jeff was one of the lawyers in the case. They did the same field test on the stress ball in court in front of the jury, and it did not render a positive result, right? APD had written in the report that it was inconclusive because I think they knew that the lab was going to come back negative. But these are the kinds of things, because a homeless Black trans woman is not likely to find an adequate defense in their minds. In the city's closing argument before the jury, they said that she was not entitled to civil damages because she just would have been sleeping on a floor anyway if she hadn't gotten arrested, right? Black-led city, Black-led police force, Black women.
And so I'll bring you into a space, close friend, but also this Black woman activist who we had to support, give mutual aid to in the instance when she had just started a new job. She was on probation for petty crime. I think it was like shoplifting. and years ago, and still on probation. But she had her house. She was starting a new job, and didn't, reveal to the employer anything. They didn't, it was fine. But she was in a domestic violence situation with her husband, and to the point where she's showing up to work with visible marks. And in one case, they had an altercation. She had the cops called, and she had had enough. The next day, she went to go file a restraining order. Turns up he ended up trying to file charges against her. And because she was on probation, they were like, this is a violation of your probation. And she was in jail for close to a month. And no bail. And so here we are, having to navigate so she doesn't lose her job with her employer, but also he's out free, and and she has children. And so I just offering how even with that of this setup in which the vulnerability to being criminalized in any case, even when you are the victim of this and surviving this, that it happens. So.
Thank you. Okay, so our last question. Talk to us about how child welfare and public safety is often the justification let me say that again because I put over there twice. Talk to us about how child welfare and public safety is often the justification for over-policing Black women.
So there's a story that's actually going on right now. This is an active situation, but there's a woman in Texas, Jocelyn Sanders, who she had a baby. His name is Josiah, and the baby developed a rash. So she went and saw the baby's pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, this rash is getting out of control. If I were you, I would go to the hospital so that they can get this, take care of this rash, because, any type of reaction or anything like that could be life-threatening. So Jocelyn took her baby to Children's Health Hospital in Dallas. And when she got to the hospital, they evaluated Josiah and they recommended a certain medication. Well, the medication had a black box label on it, which if you don't know, that's when a pharmaceutical drug basically has a label on it that says you're very likely to have a certain bad thing happen if you take this medication. So for example, this will make sense to you. Birth control, for example. Everybody knows that birth control, if you are somebody who has high blood pressure, or if you smoke, birth control is linked to blood clots. So birth control there are certain birth controls that would have a black box label because the correlation is so strong. So anyways, Jocelyn decided she didn't want to take the chance with that negative side effect, and she was not going to give her child that medication. So she refused that medication. She left the hospital. Well, after she left the hospital, CPS showed up and took Josiah, the baby, away from her because they said that she was endangering the child, all because she refused to, give this medication, and that she was basically had been neglecting the child, and they were questioning her parenting. So this is in the courts now. Already, the pediatrician who Jocelyn originally saw has already testified that they regularly saw Jocelyn, and she definitely has not been doing child neglect. Pediatricians look for those things. And so this is a great example of, basically targeting the behaviors of Black women, in this case, the parenting style and parenting choices of a Black woman in the name of child welfare and public safety. And as Tiffany mentioned before, so many things that people, the society feels like they are, I would liken it to turning into some sort of Marvel Avengers around public safety, is really just criminalizing folks, particularly Black women, and it's not actually helping and going to public safety. And so the other thing that I will mention around that is just that there's a significant problem of policing getting completely out of control here in Georgia in the name of public safety. If you want to know more and see, and talk with folks who have lived through this, the Astor Project is out in the hall. They have a table. it is a group of families who have been directly impacted by police violence here in Georgia. So definitely stop and talk with them. Some of the mothers who have lost sons to police violence are there. And if you talk to the police, I mean, these are stories that you all would recognize: the Rayshard Brooks family, Charlie Tilson, families that you've seen the stories. You talk to the police, oh, it was all had to be done because of public safety. And any mistakes that occurred, well, that's just, collateral damage, because public safety is what we're really shooting for. So
I will share an organization with you all. It's called Movement for Family Power. It was started by a woman whose children had been taken from her in New York when she was a young mother, and a girlfriend of mine who was a public defender in the Bronx for quite some time. And I don't know if Movement for Family Power has chapters outside of the Northeast, but they have a lot of resources around how the child welfare system and other carceral policing systems run parallel to one another. And here in Georgia, because we have such high rates of incarceration and arrest, and in the city of Atlanta in particular, the racial gap when it comes to police violence is so high, it's important to think about the way that arrests and pretrial incarceration practices and bail impact child welfare. I'm the social justice chair at Ebenezer, and we some years ago started doing a Juneteenth bailout. And one of our first participants was a mother. She was represented by the Office of the Public Defender, and one of her children had accused her spouse of abuse. By the time that the police came, the child realized how serious it was, because she told her mother thinking her mother was going to be mad at her dad. But she told her mother called the police on her dad, right? So the police come, the child retracts the statement, it's a teenager, and they arrest the mother for making false statements to police officers, and they arrest the father for simple assault. Both children were taken into the child welfare system, and had we not been able to bail the mother out, it's unlikely that the child would have been able to return to the mother's custody, because while we helped the mom, we were unable to help the dad. And so that within the first 72 hours or even 24 hours of someone being incarcerated pretrial, and our General Assembly is working really hard to roll back bail reform. They passed a bill that not only enhances bail across the state, but makes bail reform locally basically preempted. It's illegal in many ways. Children are the people who are left without care when their parents are taken from their homes due to arrests.
I won't rant because that was great. And so I think it's the only thing I would say is this policing of black women in all this, it's like, it is lucrative. Someone is benefiting and profiting off of this in all the ways. And really, if we look at this contradiction of how what we're doing is, it's not in service to public safety, because we're leaving so many children and broken families through this process. So that would have been my rant, but I'm gonna stop and turn it back to you.
Thank you. So those are all of our questions. Do we have any questions from the audience? If you have any questions, please step up to the mic here, and we'll take those questions.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. It's two really good panels in a row. I heard mention made of Cop City early on in the session.
Yes.
And I'm kind of hungry to hear you say a bit more specifically about implications of Cop City from the perspective of women, both, I guess, in terms of policing, which is the focus of the conversation, but also in terms of the role of women in challenging what we know to be the outcome of this process if it unfolds the way we think it's going to unfold.
Okay. Now, Tiffany, were you the one that mentioned the Cop City? Okay. Do you want to do it? I know you could talk all about that Cop City. Me too.
Well, since Atlanta proposed its police training facility known as Cop City, we've seen at least 24 other similar proposals across the country. The consensus among people on our side of the policy issue is, one, that it's a red herring to hold up police training as being the justification for these facilities, in part because data do not support that police training makes any permanent impact on police violence. Reducing policing in communities is what has a permanent impact on police violence. The other part of this is because it is a response to the 2020 uprising across the country, what that means is it's supposed to provide enhanced infrastructure for state efforts to repress political dissent with violence, right? With police violence. It is not, these facilities are not intended to discourage political dissent through civil conversations, right? It is, and the facilities are, in so much as they also like fortify the force of policing, it also reinforces the importance of policing in the public imagination, right? They are monuments to the integral role that state violence plays in upholding certain systems of oppression. And when it comes to Black women as organizers and as activists and as people who welcome folks home from carceral systems, it will fall on us first, even though, you know, there has been a multi-million-dollar in Atlanta. There is a dedicated private PR firm that sends an email every time someone from the Stop Cop City movement does anything. I got an email yesterday that says, "Good morning, just want to let you know that a Stop Cop City activist caused a riot in Tucson." Well, how is this a good use of public dollars? And it is a private company, but it's coming from the office of the mayor. And so even though they've been successful at crafting this outside agitator model where Black women and Black men are not seen as the folks on the other side being attacked by this governmental effort, if all of these facilities are successfully built, and if the criminal prosecutions against these protesters and organizations are successful, the infrastructure to suffer first and worst will be Black movement infrastructure. So as we're moving into elections and all of these other things, there's no reason for anyone to believe that your canvassers are safe, that your organizers are safe, that your donors are safe, if folks don't wake up and realize, one, nobody asked for training in 2020. That was a bridge we crossed in 2015 and 2013. Yeah. That's a lie. And again, at the very least, what officials owe to their people is honesty. And if they can't give us honesty, at least give us the respect of knowing that we see you coming, right? And so that, to me, is the most dangerous thing. I can share, I know we've talked before, I can share some of the resources. We've been doing some international advocacy with the United Nations around the impact of the political repression in Atlanta and how it spells out really disastrous things for the rest of the country.
Okay, next question.
Hello, my name is Kyla Adams. I'm a freshman political science student. And I have a question for Mrs. Williams. I see that you talked about how the teenager, she accused her father of sexual assault and like that broke up the home. But what interested me really was like the foster care system part of it. So do you have like a hand in foster care when parents do get like incarcerated? Do you like try to help the children a little bit more, or are you solely focused on like getting the parents out of jail?
Well, so at Southern Center, we don't even do juvenile law, we just do the adult criminal legal system and civil litigation. And just for clarification, the daughter didn't accuse the father of sexual assault. She accused him of grabbing her when she was trying to sneak out of the house and hitting her. But there are organizations that advocate for Movement for Family Power, for example, does also focus on the well-being of the children. Another organization you might look at is the STAR Institute, is STARR, which focuses on specifically children and others who experience sexual violence and ways to prevent and address it without the reliance on law enforcement. And then Senator Ossoff's office recently published a report on Georgia's abysmal foster care system, and foster care is predictive of a lot of other bad outcomes. So if you were to, I don't know, I think it's actually on Ossoff's like website, on the Senate website. There's more information there. But if you want to get in touch with me, I can probably share some more resources on organizations that focus on the children specifically.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I just wanted to, well, my name is Sailor Walton. I'm a first-year poli-sci student. I want to first thank you all for being here. I want to also give a shout-out to Professor Young. She's the reason why we are here. But my question is, as young black women watching these monsters take control and make rules and regulations over our bodies, what would be all of your advice to us? What do we do as we watch these laws happen, as we watch, these abortions and things like that, and as you talked about, what do we do? What's the progress?
Well, I know we're short on time, so I'm going to give just a couple of quick things. I would say, particularly for somebody in your demographic, and I say that because young folks are sort of making the headways as it relates to social media and thereof. I would definitely start highlighting what elected officials are doing. There's a lot that's being done that's in the public view on video. Everything is public, but a lot of that is not really making it to the larger public because it's not being captured in a way that would travel. Like, for example, something on TikTok. So now people are starting to look at TikTok as a great educator of social issues because people are putting it in a way that is entertaining. And so there's a lot of information, for example, like the Georgia General Assembly website. You can see everything that happens in committee. You can hear the crazy comments. You can see the crazy speeches. These people are not hiding as far as their intentions. And so I would say that's one thing that you could do is, get together with others who want to uplift the crazy when you see it. The second thing is, and I know this is not for everybody, but I do want to say it because it may be for you, the age to run for public office, even at the state level, is incredibly low. So, I think you've got to be, what is it, Representative Schofield, is it 21 or 25 for 21? So don't let, anybody tell you that you need to be, 40 or older or something like that. We have what is supposed to be a representative democracy, which means we are supposed to have people from all walks of life helping to make the policy so that no community is left behind.
I'll just say, as you ask that question, I just think about all the black women in my life who I have seen who have shown how to govern. And I've seen it for me in the workplace with these women bargaining power for a union. So that's one, that's a personal favorite. But there are many ways, whether it's into public office or at the level of, at the local level within schools, education, and so forth, all these institutions where you have bargaining power and it is a matter of just really inserting yourself and, setting up that table for you to be able to govern.
And what I would say is make sure that you're following various social justice organizations. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes they give you recommendations and will send out things of what they need help with to push forward certain initiatives or to stop certain bills. And so doing that would be, and get your friends together. You're not too far from the Capitol. So it's you can get down there sometimes easier than people that maybe work. So, or if you don't work, not. But yes, I would say follow the social justice organizations and they'll give a number of different volunteer opportunities for you.
Thank you.
Did you want to? Okay. Thank you. Okay, that concludes. You all have a great day. Thank you, ladies.